Hello and welcome to Myths, Monsters and Mysteries. If you're a lover of old myths, monsters, whether folktale or from fantasy, or enjoy the real-life mysteries which surround us, then you've come to the right place. This week we're looking at the strange plague that hit the town of Strasbourg in 1518. This wasn't some black plague or any other normal illness though. This strange malady caused the ill to spontaneously start dancing. Those who danced would dance for days at a time, with exhaustion being the only thing that could stop them. The even odder part about all this, it isn't unique, and in fact cases of this illness can still be found to this day. The focus of today's video started on a warm July day where a woman called Mrs. Truffier walked out of her house and began dancing in the streets. From contemporary accounts, there wasn't anything unusual about that particular day. There was no music, no festival, or other dancers. It was by every other metric a day like any other. At first people ignored her, but as the hours crept on, more and more people came to see what just was happening. She claimed that she couldn't stop and needed to dance, and even when people pleaded and bargained with her, she seemed unable to stop. She kept dancing till she collapsed from exhaustion. After resting, Mrs. Truffier started dancing again, seemingly unable to stop the compulsion. It soon spread, and in less than a week, over 30 people were infected with this dancing disease, only stopping when either their bodies failed them or they were physically stopped. To try and stop this dancing plague, the civic and religious leaders tried to force people to stop. When that didn't work, they handed the authority over to the doctors, who decided to let them dance themselves free of it. To get these dancers to dance even more, the doctors arranged for the guild halls to be opened and be designated as dance halls. Musicians were hired to accompany the dancing, and professional dancers were brought in to help the afflicted continue dancing. As you may have guessed, this only made the situation worse, and over the coming days, the afflicted went from around 30 or so to as many as 400 people. After the first plan failed so spectacularly, the Council of Strasbourg decided to go in another direction, banning all dancing and even all music, according to the sources. Sources do differ about the death toll of this dancing plague, with some texts saying dozens of people died, while others not mentioning a single death. The sources that say people died were from much later texts, while some notes from the physicians attending to the dancing sick and the notes from the Strasbourg Council itself at the time don't mention a single death. It could be that the council and the doctors just didn't mention people dying at all, but if over a dozen people were dying a day, like some texts later mentioned, it seems odd that the source of the time wouldn't even mention it. Whatever you believe though, the dancing plague finally started to slow down, and 6 weeks after it started, the plague ended. However, this isn't just a one-off mystery. The dancing plague of Strasbourg is perhaps the most documented example of this phenomena, and is certainly the best documented, with contemporary sources like physician notes, cathedral sermons, local and regional chronicles, and even notes issued by the Strasbourg City Council being available for us. But there have been many other cases of such dancing plagues or social manias which have swept countries or even just small villages. The first outbreak of this kind of mania we know about comes from an account of Bishop Eligus, who, after telling some ne'er-do-wells to stop dancing around the church, called upon God's wrath and forced them to dance for a whole year before they were allowed to stop. This is of course ridiculous, but it does make what we were saying about social mania and the fact that this kind of illness existed seem true. And since this was written between 588 and 683 AD, we know that this sort of mania or illness has been around for a long time, at least from the 7th century. The outbreaks we have some more evidence of, though, began during the 13th century, including one in 1237, where a load of children travelled 12 miles from Erfurt to Arnstadt, jumping and dancing all the way for seemingly no reason at all. The children were fine, but as a side note, the story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin originated at the same time, around about the same geographic area. Whether the mania outbreak was based on the story, or the story was based on this outbreak, is unclear, though interesting. Another incident in 1278 involved around 200 people dancing on a bridge over the River Meuse, resulting in its collapse. In June 1374, one of the biggest outbreaks began in Aachen, a city that's now a part of Germany. There aren't as many surviving records as the case in Strasbourg, but there are records of this dancing mania reaching all the way to Italy before it faded. But it wasn't just cities that were hit with this mania. Strangely, a lot of these dancing or social mania cases can be found in nunneries. For nuns, dancing wasn't the biggest symptoms of this strange malady. Instead, they would often use crude language, berate and insult their superiors, and exhibit suggestive behaviours. One convent's nuns would regularly meow like cats. Interestingly again, in the case of nunneries, it was normally the younger nuns who would do this. And like in all other cases we've found so far, it would simply fade over time. All these cases are strange, and even though we have a surprisingly large amount of evidence for them, it's still easy to feel that this mania is something that happened in the past and doesn't affect us anymore. Especially as all these cases from the Middle Ages, it is assumed that it was a strange quirk of history. However, that just is not true. There have been multiple cases of this social mania, even up to present day. Though, interestingly, the symptoms of this social mania, of this mass mania, would change and shift, with the dancing part fading away and new symptoms becoming more prevalent. But to give some more up-to-date examples, in the United States, there was a case in 1962 called the June bug outbreak. In June 1962, 62 women at a dressmaking factory in the southern United States started experiencing strange symptoms, including severe nausea, rashes, and a breakout on their skin. Those with this disease were sure that they could feel insects crawling all over them, that they could see them and even smell them in some cases. And although experts spent weeks searching for these bugs and insects, they couldn't find a cause, and others were called in to discover the pathogen, but none was found. Another case in 1962 was documented in Tanganyika, now known as Tanzania, where an epidemic of laughter and laughing attacks took place amongst the children. It started in one school, but very soon this uncontrollable laughing spread to over 14 schools and over 1,000 children. In this case, laughing wasn't the only sign, but also fainting, respiratory problems, and rashes as well. Like all the rest of these cases though, the diseases started to fade, and 6 weeks after it started, it was gone. A few years after that, in 1965, several girls complained of dizziness at an all-girls school in Blackburn, England. Within a couple of hours, 85 girls from the school were rushed by ambulance to a nearby hospital after fainting. Other symptoms the girls showed were swooning, moaning, chattering of teeth, respiratory problems, and tetany, which is a form of involuntary muscle contraction. No cause was ever found for this, and the symptoms again disappeared after a few days. The list honestly goes on and on, with new cases popping up in the UK, USA, Belgium, Afghanistan, and more. Symptoms can vary, with some places just reporting fainting or vomiting, with other cases having more extreme symptoms. A good example is in 2019 in Malaysia, where those affected reported to see a face of pure evil. Another case in 2011 in New York had all the children affected from one school swearing and cursing without the ability to stop. In some cases, this lasted only for a few days, some weeks, but it always seems to fade away without anyone quite sure of the cause or what stops it. What actually causes this social mania, and what stops it? is still a mystery. Theories from the 7th to the 14th century either revolved around demonic possession or a punishment from God. Especially in the cases of mania in nunneries, priests were often called to exorcise these demons. God's punishment theory is also due to odd commonality of these manias, as most of them appear around midsummer, June, July, and leave around September, October. In fact, the mania used to be called St. Vitus's dance. St. Vitus is the saint of lightning strikes, animal attacks, oversleeping, and most importantly for today, dancing. In Germany, where many of these cases originated, St. Vitus's feast was celebrated with dancing before his statue, and the local belief was that those who failed to please St. Vitus would be cursed by being forced to dance. Another theory, of course, which doesn't revolve around God or punishment, would be a contamination. In the 20th century, it was suggested that the bread made from rye flour was contaminated with a fungal disease called ergot, which is known to produce muscle spasms, fever, and hallucinations. Ergot victims may also appear dazed, become manic, or have other forms of tremors. As a point of interest, this ergot is actually what is blamed for the Salem witch trials as well. As most wheat is harvested in the summer, the timeline of most cases taking place around June and July makes sense as well, as the new grain with ergot is starting to be used for bread at this point. The theory then is that once people realised the wheat was infected and stopped using it, that stops the mania and it goes away. However, ergot wouldn't explain everything. And in cases like the Strasbourg incident we talked about at the beginning of the video, it couldn't explain how people from an entire city would be continually affected for so long. And especially with all our notes we have from this case, that no one wrote it down either. The most widely accepted theory, though, is by American medical historian called John Waller, believing that the dancing plague was a form of mass psychogenic disorder called mass psychogenic illness. And for the sake of the video, we're going to be calling that MPI from now on. MPI is classified as a psychogenic disorder and is a condition which uses outside issues and stressors can cause physical symptoms matching other disorders. Waller's idea is that all the outbreaks take place under circumstances of extreme stress and generally take the form based around local fears. That makes sense in many cases, such as the multiple cases of mania in the nunneries. These young ladies who become nun, many of them who were forced by their families into the nunnery life, led a highly regimented life, which often marks by strict disciplinary action if they stepped outside their vows of poverty, chastity, or in some cases, silence. It is very easy to imagine that there would be a lot of repressed stress in the nunnery and a subconscious desire to speak their minds, especially when you can blame it on a demon. This could also explain why MPI seems to hit schools so often, as that would be a great place to find people under a lot of stress who also don't yet know how to deal with it properly. Medical sociologist Robert Bartholomew agrees with Waller, saying such outbreaks seem to hit schools where discipline is tight and children have no way to vent or express stress without punishment. Bartholomew goes on to say that under some prolonged stress, the nerves and neurons that send messages to the brain become disrupted, resulting in an array of neurological symptoms such as twitching, shaking, convulsions, and trance-like states. Walter cites a series of famines and the presence of such diseases as smallpox and syphilis as the overwhelming stressors affecting residents of Strasbourg in our beginning case. Famine and a flaring of diseases like smallpox would also explain why other historical cases also happened around June or July as well. However, Not all will agree with Waller, and in fact, some people don't think MPI exists at all. One of the biggest issues with MPI is that there's lack of logic in the argument, as it boils down to, we can't figure out what's going on with these people, so it must be MPI. This makes the MPI into the boogeyman of psychological disorders. Whether you don't know what's going on with somebody, you just slap a label of MPI on them and move on. Another point of contention is that Waller also states people who are the most affected by MPI are the low IQ, women and children, which, if you didn't notice, is another way of saying everyone but the average man. Societal and economic reasons for why women and children will be under different stresses than men aren't addressed as well as they could be. In general, it seems to put men on a pedestal of some kind for being able to resist such illnesses when everyone else can't. MPI then might not be the cause or the reason or even exist. And in fact, we still don't know what causes this dancing plague and other social manias, and we won't know for a long time yet. Due to their strangeness and lack of lasting symptoms, it can seemingly hit anywhere on the planet and then fade away, leaving no evidence. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, consider liking the video and subscribing. Lastly, if I missed something or got something wrong, please let me know in the comments. If you have another idea for a video, a monster, or a mystery you think would be interesting, let me know.